of the town of Hilton Head Island for February 15th, 2022. Krista, have we complied with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we have.
Thank you. Please call the committee roll.
Certainly, sir. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Harkins?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mr. Lennox?
Here.
All present, sir.
Thank you, Krista. Does staff have any changes to the published agenda? Thank you. Any changes recommended by the committee?
Move for approval of the agenda as stated.
Thank you. A second? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed by the same. We have minutes from January 18th, 2022. Are there any changes, additions, or deletions?
Move for approval.
Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. Krista, do we have an appearance by citizens?
Yes, sir, we do. Today, we have one citizen that signed up to speak, and that is Mr. Holden. Mr. Holden?
Morning. Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor. Nice to be back to live meeting. Seems during COVID, corruption actually increased. Mr. Lennox, the only way to stop your corruption is expose it with facts. You, McCann, Orlando, lawyers Coltrane, Gruber, Bush, dishonest Bluffton-town lawyer Terry Finger, all have been caught committing fraud with the drafting of a 5-year DMO contract to allow the illegal issue and use of millions of tax funds by Bill Miles and the Hilton Head Chamber, with zero accounting, oversight, proven performance metrics, and returns to taxpayers. Plus, you violated 8 tax laws, FOIA laws, Nonprofit Corporation Act laws, procurement laws, and South Carolina constitutional laws. Plus, Mr. Lennox, you, Harkins, and McCann claim you went to the chamber offices to see it, chamber accounting, reported all looked okay. This was a lie and fraud. We desperately need an FBI investigation of all of you and deep forensic independent audits of all town records that CPA John Troyer and others control on how and where all the town taxpayer funds have been used illegally, criminally, and disappeared. You were all hired and elected and trusted to approve, spend, and guard our tax money like your own money, not funny money in the game of Monopoly. Mr. Lennox, can you name one thing I have said wrong about your illegal issue and use of millions of tax funds by Bill Miles and the Chamber? I hope you're ready to testify. Mr. Lennox, the recent town audit by Green Finney, who I called, said this was not an independent audit. It was just a hired audit of numbers they were handed by John Troyer, Gruber, and Orlando, who all proven to be dishonest and used tax funds illegally. You call this a positive external audit report. This is fraud. This audit is nothing but an internal hired town audit. They only show the numbers you and town insiders want us all to see. Only a forensic audit will identify crimes committed by insiders like you, Orlando, CPA Troyer, Gruber, etc. Again, each of you have already been caught breaking the law. What does this tell you? The 2022 focus for me will be forensic audits, chamber tax theft, and a $50 million town lawsuit for the illegal criminal use of $200,000 in tax funds. And Miss Lisa Salk is getting ready to learn a big lesson in life. Mr. Lennox, these are very serious allegations, and if true, could result in yours and others' arrest. This cesspool of corruption must stop. You must all learn to be honest, follow the laws, and be transparent, and apparently you have not done that. And that right there is outrageous. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great day.
Krista, any other citizens to make public comment?
No, sir. That concludes the hearing.
Thank you. We have 2 agenda items under new business. The first is an update from the Community Foundation of the Low Country pertaining to the American Rescue Plan Act 2021 grants. Scott Wehrman. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity to update you on this wonderful public-private partnership that the Community Foundation is honored to be a part of. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Scott Weirman, the President and CEO of the Community Foundation of the Low Country as of January of last year. And my wife and I are thrilled to be new residents here in Hilton Head. Let me first just say that the foundation has been privileged to have a strong working partnership and relationship with the town for a number of years on a number of projects, and we hope that we can continue that going forward. The opportunity related to the ARPA funding was wonderful that we were able to work out an agreement last fall between the town and the Community Foundation. And in fact, it actually was the very first public-private partnership around ARPA funding in the state of South Carolina, and has served as a model for other communities around the state. So I've been asked by a number of other communities, how did you structure it, how is it working, and other communities are finding similar ways. So thank you for being pioneers on that front. As you know, we worked with the town very closely to figure out the criteria for the awards. The town committed $1 million of its ARPA funding, and the funds are to be used to benefit low to moderate income residents of Hilton Head Island. The maximum award set by the town was $50,000. The foundation last fall formed a citizens committee of Hilton Head residents to be the advisory board to review applications, to look at the guidelines, and to make funding recommendations. Those committee members are Peaches Peterson, who is chairing that committee, Sheila Mahoney, Reverend Doug Fletcher, Jerry Farron, Herb Ford, Galen Miller, and John Troyer has represented the town and been a wonderful resource for us.
Got the right people.
Sounds like it's a great group, and had the pleasure of sitting in and listening to their deliberations, and they've taken the responsibilities very seriously. The first application deadline was November 30th, and we received 15 applications from organizations that are focused on food insecurity, emergency housing, healthcare, childcare, and education. The committee met on December the 10th and decided to fund 13 of the 15 applicants for a total of $338,825. I believe you received a report of each of the organizations that received funding at your last meeting. But let me just say, a heavy emphasis has been put particularly on food insecurity, as that continues to be one of the greatest challenges for folks that are trying to come out of this pandemic. The other two organizations that did not receive funding initially, one was not focused on those targeted areas, and the committee decided that perhaps down the road, if funds were available, they might might be reconsidered. And then the other group, there were some issues around who would be eligible for funding through them. We have since met with that group and have worked with them to say that certainly if they can make that adjustment, we would entertain another proposal. All of these 13 grantees are required to report back on who they served, how the funds were used, provide the appropriate accounting, and so that we can make a report back by June 30th of this year. All of these groups are eligible for additional consideration and funding. We will have our second cycle of funding deadline is coming up on February the 28th. We already have a few applications in hand, and other groups we know that are working on that, working on applications, and the committee will reconvene on March 11th and make additional consideration. We believe between those two cycles, we will exhaust the initial $500,000, and when the second tranche of $500,000 becomes available later in your next fiscal year, we will repeat the cycles again and put word out. We've had no challenge finding good applications. As you might imagine, there are a lot of groups that are still working hard to meet the needs of our fellow residents and helping them try to come out of this pandemic. One last thing I will mention to you is that one of the other benefits out of this, and the timing is actually great, is because so many of these groups are working with similar populations and have issues that if someone's hungry, they may also have housing issues. We are convening this initial group of recipients today to come together to talk about other collaborative things they may do, even beyond ARPA. And so we were happy to bring that because there are some learnings that we will get out of that, but we hope that they will learn from one another as well. So let me just say we were really, again, honored to be partners with the town on this project, and look forward to the next cycle of grants, and happy to come back and report out on those grants as well. And then we'll be, again, doing this again later this calendar year. And I'll try to answer any questions you may have.
Scott, good job. I was very impressed when I read the summary that we received in our packet. It worked, I think, exactly as we would have hoped. Comments from the committee? Glenn?
Thank you. Thanks for the report. This is a happy partnership, and I'm really glad that we are partnering with the Community Foundation. Can you flesh out a little bit about what the food insecurity, how that's going to be met by these various participants?
Yeah, so you have a number of different groups that are emerging. I mean, you have, Second Helpings is a group that's obviously been in that. Sandalwood has really grown, and they were a $50,000 recipient. They have already told our staff that they have now used all $50,000, and they will likely be coming back. We saw this, though, even with funds that the Community Foundation had established around COVID in 2020, that a lot of faith organizations have really stepped up, and I'm talking now about a 4-county service territory that the foundation has. So we're finding additional groups that are stepping in, trying to help get food out, and we're hoping there are opportunities for additional coordination there. Obviously, you have Deep Well as an organization that has important connections as well, and being able to refer folks to these other agencies is really important.
So you talked about what I would call free food. Are there any of these programs that are offering a discounted food, a smaller charge than it might cost in a grocery store, for example?
Not that I'm aware of.
Good morning, Scott.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming.
Sure.
It's delightful to have a quality partner helping all of us to help the community. In terms, is there any tension between satisfying the immediate needs of an individual or an organization versus using some of that funding for long-term sustenance? Does that come up?
That's a great question, and actually that's even beyond this ARPA funding. It's an ongoing question in terms of, to me, there's always a hierarchy of need. You have immediate emergency needs that will exist. The question is, how do you deploy additional resources or refocus resources to try to help people getting out of the emergency situation? If someone is having a crisis every other week, that's really not a crisis. That's an ongoing challenge, and there are other issues. Apart from this, the foundation recently made a grant through our normal grant-making cycle to Deep Well for a program that they're starting that we are seeding that is looking at identifying individuals and figuring out creative ways to help, almost kind of like on a case-by-case basis, figure out what are the underlying issues that cause the emergencies. It may be education, it could be transportation to work, it could be job placement. And so we've made a lead grant to try to help them with that. That's a really big issue in terms of in all of philanthropy is, yes, there will always be some immediate emergency needs, but what are we doing to try to shift so that people come out of the crisis situation? And so with partners like a Deep Well, Bluffton Self-Help is doing something similar in their market, trying to get people out of those crisis situations. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank
Okay.
you.
Sure.
One last question. The recipients of today, for the next round, will they be eligible to apply again?
Yes, they will be, and we've let them know. And in fact, a number of the original 13 had asked for larger amounts, but it looked like the timing was going to carry over into the next year. And so to try to be the best stewards as possible, the committee recommended giving them less than the full amount with a goal of getting them through June 30th, at which time they can apply again. But so yes, we will likely hear from a number of these agencies again, and we actually hope we will hear from them.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your stewardship.
Sure, thank you, appreciate it.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Scott, welcome.
Thank
And,
you, thank you.
I too am very pleased to have you in the Community Foundation as a partner. This is a very important topic overall, okay? And having someone that can catalyst the conversation, as you spoke of, bringing those organizations together to have a more collective conversation, I think is going to be more beneficial, not only for those that are in need, but for those of us that are making decisions as to how to help, right? I'm sure you're going to gather a lot more information and probably be able to answer Councilman Hawkins' question in a little bit more detail
Yes,
after
yes.
those conversations happen, which is so important to us. One thing that comes to my mind as far as the organizations that are applying, because those are typically organizations that are already in the business, right?
That's correct.
And I'm sure that they have a certain number of, I guess, reoccurring clients, so to speak. Has there been any push for better marketing? Okay, because I will say, for one, my phone rings all the time with people looking for help, right? And I have to, of course, push them to these organizations. I just want to make sure, because Hilton Head as a community does such a great job with helping, that message is out there for all those that need help and not just for those that are in the know, if that makes sense to you.
I understand, yeah, yeah.
So with the next tranche of the 160 that's left, or the next 500, if that piece could
Sure.
have a little bit more attention, I think would be great.
Okay.
The situation that we're in here currently with COVID and, just with market rates across the country, we see inflation. The rental market is off the chain, which the demand is there, so all landlords are looking at how they can jack up the rents,
Right.
okay? So I appreciate the food insecurity, but I think that rent situation is going to get graver and graver as we move forward, and being able to react to that accordingly, I think is important. The other thing about that information coming to us, once you have some true stats around that, I think that helps us, particularly with our sustainable community neighborhoods, affordable housing conversation, because now we then know that things are changing here, and we may be on the brink of experiencing more of an exodus, okay, because it's not just that crisis, okay?
Right, right.
It's a more ongoing situation, and we've got to be aware of that, and we've got to be able to be more proactive about how we combat that. So, again, I thank you for the effort that you're putting into this, and thank you for this two-way conversation.
Sure.
It's definitely healthy. So.
Great, thank you.
Scott, I noticed that of the 13 grants awarded, 6, almost half were full funding, and that's very, very strong. I did notice one name that received funding that I hadn't seen before, the Low Country Legal Volunteers. And I took a look, and they're headquartered in Okatee,
That's correct.
but they have impact on the island.
They do. They serve Beaufort County, including Hilton Head Island, and a lot of that had to deal with like rent assistance and folks evictions and all that. Ann Kaywood is their executive director. She has a great cohort of volunteer attorneys or retired attorneys that help with individual cases. But yes, they do a lot of work here, and they've also just recently opened an office in Hardyville as well. So they're expanding their footprint
And I noticed in the grant narrative, of the $22,000 grant that was awarded, $15,000 was allocated to salaries for direct client support, and $7,000 allocated to other costs. So do they actually assist with past due rents?
So they don't actually make grant awards to individuals. Other agencies do that. What they are providing is assistance when someone may be threatening with evictions, or so they're providing kind of the legal counsel free of charge.
Great. Are these grants made in advance, or are they reimbursements?
So once the committee awards it, we sign a contract with each of the grantees, and the funds become available to them as soon as we receive funding from the town. So this is not reimbursements. We're making a commitment, and then they have money to work with.
Prior to COVID, you talk about food and shelter. Prior to COVID, I had the chance to visit 2 or 3 food banks around the island. And I would sit down and have lunch with everybody, as many people as I could that were there. And much to my surprise, each one of them said food isn't the issue as much as shelter. So I have a bias as you go through this process as a result of that towards shelter. As much as you possibly can. And lastly, I think it's important to note, and I'm sure in your discussions with these applicants, you make them aware that these funds coming from the federal government are extraordinary. And they're non-recurring at this point,
Yes.
and certainly they're incremental. And so any funding that is awarded through the foundation as a result of this shouldn't necessarily, to Alex's point, be built into their permanent financing. However, we got to find a way to build it into their permanent financing, because once this is over next year, these funds probably won't be available.
Understood.
And yet the need is still there.
Right, yes, understood.
So anything you can do to recommend a way to help this ongoing is appreciated. We got a year to do it.
Thank you. Yes, it's understood, and that's always one of the issues with our funding is just what is sustainable. Beyond even just these ARPA emergency funding, nonprofits understanding that this is not going to continue, and how are they going to respond, and with smaller budgets going forward. I will say, though, that it's just been amazing how these nonprofits have stepped up over the last couple of years. They've had to be very creative and flexible to remain open. The demand has probably never been higher in their life cycles, and yet they've had the strain of events being canceled, fundraising events that would help them, and just how they've pivoted so quickly to continue to meet increasing demands is really outstanding.
Excellent. Please pass on to your staff and committee our thanks for a job well done.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time this morning.
John, we are into the 8th month, and you have results from the 7th month.
We do.
The lights are still on, the bills are paid.
The lights are still on, the bills are paid. I think that summarizes my whole report.
Okay.
See you later.
Any questions?
See you on the course.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be back in person, and so we appreciate the opportunity to share a few items. So here we are 7 months in. Key issues, this is still the same as what it has been. We're still monitoring revenues, we're still controlling expenditures, and we're still making adjustments where we need to. And so on the bottom half, so far so good. That remains my message. So far so good. Our measures are working. So the town continues to benefit with our reserves that town council had set aside before in efforts to diversify revenues. And so that has certainly helped us throughout this whole pandemic. General fund revenues You look at revenue, January, another strong month, 6 of 7 greater than last year, and so we had another good month in the books. Year to date, we still exceed the last 3 years, and so that's a good start. We are reminded that there's still quite a bit to go, so you can look at the first 7 months, July through January, and we've done very well. But if you look on the right half of the graph, we still got a substantial amount of collections yet to go on our revenue side. So we're happy where we are, and we look forward to still finishing out the year strong. Property taxes, you can see the green is the current year, and so December, we had a really strong in January. Not quite what 2 years ago and 3 years ago were, but certainly better than last year. And you put December plus January together, and we're better than all 3 years. So, yeah, I just point out that our normal years are up there, and last year with the delay at the county for the billing, it certainly impacted our financial situation. So we can be appreciative that all that has been worked out, and it shows in our current year collections. Property taxes, you can look at year to date, and so we've made substantial progress through January, but February and March are still going to be important. So we're still working very, very closely with our friends at the county, and we'll look for still some substantial payments yet. Revenue preview. This is just our normal list, and you can look and see 41% over last year to date, so that's really, really strong. We're happy about all of this. Only a couple of negatives on here. Electric franchise fee, it's just kind of an oddity, and I think a piece of that is going to be weather related. And then the road usage fee, obviously town council has paused collections, and so we show up a negative, and that negative will carry forward through the end of the year.
John, do you have any insight into the change in business license revenue?
Yes. A couple of things. One of the things with the new model business ordinance, a number of property owners who rented with one unit, that one unit exemption is no longer there. And so we're collecting, and they're responsible for business licenses, kind of a whole class of renters who were not subject to it before. And so that's a piece of it. And a piece of it is a strong economy. And so our numbers are good.
What about pushbacks from these one rental property owner against the idea of having to get a business license? Has there been much?
We have had a number of conversations. We work closely with a lot of people, a lot of property owners, and we've made a lot of progress. We'll say that.
How would you characterize the conversation?
Yeah, mostly positive. And just from a enforcement standpoint, it's a whole lot easier to just have that everybody, it's the same rules are applicable to everybody, is a much easier conversation than, well, if you only own one. We've had instances where one LLC or one person owns 33 LLCs, so they would have 33 different non-business license paying entities, and it's just what we try to go for in the finance office is a level playing field, and I think this model business ordinance certainly was a big step forward in a level playing field.
I think you're getting support from the management companies?
Yes.
Help in getting this done?
Our management companies have been wonderful to work with, and certainly great partners, and they help us get the property owners on board. And so the bigger challenges is when we're having to work with the individual property owners, because there's just so many, and we can work with the property management companies, and they get large groups at a time.
Thank you.
John, it would be interesting sometime to blow out or blow up business licenses. One, the number, and two, if you could break it out into categories. It would be nice to know what's in the service industry. You know, it would be nice to know what's in manufacturing. It would start to give us a little deeper dive into trends on the island.
Yes, and one of the things I think that also helped was so much attention was on the model business license ordinance and the implementation. A lot of people are now more familiar with the business license requirements, and we're signing people up. So yeah, we'll include that in our next month's report.
Isn't it amazing? Now we've had today's meeting talking about year-to-date financial performance of the town. Yesterday, we had a redistricting meeting, and these issues are now starting to spill over into one another. And you can't talk about one without talking about another. And business license specifically for single property owners is a good example.
Just to expand on Councilman Hawkins' request, I know we won't be comparing apples to apples because of the changes that were made, but it would still be nice to see prior years, okay? Because right now, collecting 25% year-to-date, you know, at least for me, it doesn't really tell a lot in terms of the reaction to the new business license model. I think that will help tease it out a little bit more if we can compare back.
Yeah, because there's the number of business licenses and the dollars per business license, and yeah, we've got some statistics we'll share. Okay, and the other thing I noted here is that last month's total was 35% of all of last year. This month's total is 55%, so we collected 20% or almost 20% in 1 month, and so January was a big month, and we always like those months. Collected, yet to collect, and so our pie is now more than halfway there, and so showing real progress in our collections, and so January 31st, this is right where we'd want to be. Real estate transfer fee, we got this just right at the end of last week, so I was able to adjust and put these numbers in here. The first draft through didn't have it, and we got our payment from the Register of Deeds, and so we're able to have a good report here in January for real estate transfer fees. You look at year-to-date, we're not quite what last year was, but last year was an exceptional year, so if we're anywhere close to last year on this, we're doing great.
So what are you going to do when it comes time to budget real estate transfer fees for fiscal '23?
We'll have a good conversation about that, but it seems to be strong. We hope, but of course, it's all transaction based. Yeah, I think
That trend will continue?
we hope so. We hope so, and so I can show on the next slide here. Last couple of years, you look at the blue, and that was last year, and it's way up for the second half of the year. And you look at the yellow, and that was 2 years ago. Not as strong. And so which one are we going to have for the rest of the year? That'd be interesting to watch.
John, following up on Tom's comment there, I think it would be useful for you to reach out to the Realtors Association and get what their projection is about what sales are going to be moving into next year.
That's an excellent idea. We've got a meeting with one of their committees this week, as a matter of fact, and so I will be sure to ask that question. And so, it seems like the statistics, the amount of sales are up, the dollar amount per sales are up, and $64 question is how long will this go, and what do they expect for the future? And I will ask that question. Thank you, Mr. Stanford.
We've got 3 issues with the realtors to talk about: transfer fee, renewal, trend, and single rental property owner business licensing. Are you putting them all together when you meet with them?
We can. We can. This one particular meeting was more about the possibility or consideration of extension, and that was the primary purpose of this meeting. But it doesn't prevent us from.
Our primary meeting on Friday, John, Josh, myself, will be talking about the real estate transfer fee extension. One, supportive of the continuation of it, but two, we're telling a really good story of how it was used over time and what would Hilton Head be like without it, right? But while we're there, that's our primary, and our secondary has to be, it's the elephant in the room, the short-term rentals, the trends, and just have some real good discussion with your legislative committee, with Gene Beck, president, Jocelyn, president, and a few others, so we'll make sure that we come back with some valid info.
If I may just jump in on what was just asked about the transfer fee. I think the canary in the mine is the time on the market. So if you can go back 6, 8 months and track time on the market, I think you begin to get some level of indication whether or not you can count on the same trends for the last 2 years.
And supply.
Of inventory at this point. There.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's important that to whatever degree you can get from the realtors, the percentage of this activity, the positive activity that is germane to houses moving to short-term rentals is also very important to us as we move forward. Because we're having a very good discussion right now about short-term rentals that we need to have, but without understanding the trend in terms of the inventories on Hilton Head as it relates to short-term rentals. I think we're kind of blowing in the wind, not really making a valid decision. That's just my 2 cents as far as having good data in front of us as we make decisions.
That's a good point, and along those same lines, would the realtors have access to the trend in 4 versus 6% properties? I know there was a trend toward 4 10 years ago as people tried to avoid Act 388. But now with the trend toward converting single-family residents into short-term rentals, I wonder if that's reversing itself and going back towards 6.
Yes, and the county updates their records generally annually, and so and I'm thinking that it takes a little bit of while to recognize and acknowledge from the county's perspective who is doing the renting and who has the categorization, the 6% and the 4%, and so I think that's going to be a lagging indicator.
John, you're probably already looking at this, but if you look at the age cohort 55 to 60, 65 to 70, 75 and up, throughout the country it's growing, and the curve is something like this. So to the extent that this continues to be viewed as a good community to retire to, I think a certain amount of weight has to be given to that as you predict demand in the future.
Yes. Yes, a lot of people found they could work remote and would choose to work remote from here. We found a lot of instances of those. And so what might have been a 6% at one time then goes back to a 4% as people moved here full time. So we have both dynamics. General fund expenditures. I thought it was kind of interesting. October, November, December, all of this year were less than last year. And then January, merit raises were implemented and we're kind of getting back to normal through January. And so January kind of fit right in between November and December. And so right where we would expect. Year to date, a very reasonable 2.4% more than last year to date. And I think it'll be interesting to watch this the rest of the year, but very comfortable with that number. General fund expenditures, you can see the different categories. We've had a couple of shifts in our classifications this year, and that explains most of our bigger negatives and bigger positives. It's more of shifting numbers than it is anything else. And so we can talk about our fire rescue IT moved from place to place. We did some park projects last year in the sheriff and beach services. This year we're doing it out of public projects and facilities, and so outside of those differences from year to year, I think our numbers are very comparable.
John, where will the fire rescue lease show up?
I've asked Brad, and we've talked with that, to put it right into the fire rescue budget. One, to just underscore the effort and the investment that the town makes into fire rescue, but also the primary reason was that as the lease expires, the expectation is that we would renew the investment in equipment. And so as one lease ends, we replace it with a new lease, and the budget stays basically the same every year.
Will it be done by this fiscal year, or will there be a carryover?
Oh, it's going to be a carryover. I think we've had a number of discussions with just what it takes to order the fire equipment, and it's special order, and they only started after we made the order, and so.
Does that have any effect on the trade-in value of the used equipment?
Those are already locked in, and so they were locked in at the time of the deal. And so as if they take longer to deliver, they're going to get older equipment in trade. And so there's also incentives in the contract to finish on time. Here we are. If you consider our expending through January, 23 million spent out of 44 million, or 52% last year, or 51. I think a couple of different things is that we're not holding back anything like we were last year. Last year we were more hesitant about COVID, and this year I think it also underscores that it shows we're a little tighter on the budget, and so those numbers are representative of that. So just a little bit tighter budget than last year, and I think we all feel that.
We continue to accrue the $2 million
Every month.
public safety fee. At the end of this year, we'll have $4 million accrued.
Yes. Yes, we do that every month. We split it out, so it's the same amount every single month. And that would be my expectation, is until there's a resolution. Good news on this slide. We talk a lot about having reserves and being able to, our expenses can be pretty level every single month, and yet we have to wait for property taxes to come in and wait for other revenues to come in. So we need a little money in the bank to start the year. This month, we made that transition from a net negative that we start every year with to a net positive. And so you can look at the difference. Last year's numbers, 5 million negative. This year's numbers, 300,000 positive. Primary difference is the property taxes, but it's also just an indicator that this is a good year. So we can report in January that this is right where we'd like to be.
John, on the reserves, I know this committee has talked a lot about, I guess, our comfortable level of reserves. Will you have enough information for us to have a qualified conversation as we start to talk budget with you about the reserve topic?
Yeah, it's our expectation. We're doing some of that work right now to look at best practices, and we're looking at where do we fit compared to best practices, where do we fit compared to where we should be, and then we'd like to have that conversation through the budget process so that as town council adopts a budget, then they're adopting an updated reserve policy. And so it would be our expectation that we would make some recommendations about maybe tweaking these. We think we're pretty good, but we are taking a look, and then anything that we find, we will certainly recommend to council, and council will have an opportunity to talk about it and act or not act, or
John, best practices is a broad concept. And so the main thing that I'm concerned about in terms of our reserves is disaster reserves and how construction expenses have increased. Are we getting some sampling out there of various information that would be useful in establishing the budget for that?
yes, and we've looked at some changes in pricing structure for disaster responses, and so we've also got some measures of inflation for that, so that what was an adequate reserve in some areas about disaster response, now the prices have gone up, and so we need to adjust.
That's my point, yes. Thank you.
Just a simple example of, if last year we had $1 in reserves, next year we should have $1.05.
Yes. Temporary use of reserves, you can look and see general fund each month. I like to look at this, and you can look at the 2022, the number of times that 2022 is positive compared to the previous years, and those are indicators that we've got a good year. Here's just a line item year-to-date, temporary use of reserves, and again, we're better than the last 3 years. And so a good place to be in January, but we have some up and downs yet to go to finish the year. So we want to make sure that we hold our expenses appropriately, and we'll continue to watch those revenues. So this is the same graph with the rest of the year, and you can see there's lots of up and downs yet to come. Beach fee collections, again, better than January was better than the last couple of years. Year to date, certainly continuing over the last couple of years. Hospitality, same thing. January was better than the last couple of years, and year to date continues to be better than the last couple of years. So each measure, another aspect or a facet of the economy.
In the middle of a pandemic.
Middle of the
In
pandemic.
the middle of a labor shortage. You got that.
And you can kind of feel, especially with the beach fees and the hospitalities, just the island in February, we're busy. So it shows.
I think it's important to point out here, we have the conversation about metrics. More quantity doesn't always equate to more of anything else, right? I think inflation has something to do with that also, okay? Room rates are going up, everything's going up, so the tax applied to it also goes up. So I think that's an important piece that we need to keep in mind as we watch those numbers.
Yeah, and we heard some feedback from one of the resorts. They were having staffing issues, trying to maintain a full staff, and so one of their responses was, let's raise prices so that we would have lower occupancy, and yet when they raised prices, they stayed at 100% occupancy.
Indirect comment to Alex's is that it would be interesting in parallel fashion to track consumer satisfaction. And the reason I bring that up is, yes, volume has increased, but we know that the hotels and the restaurants, as an example, have work shortages. So that has to spill over into consumer satisfaction. So even though it's trending up, I question how long-term it could be till we address that.
Thank you. It's very important. Our chairman likes to always ask, what do our total governmental funds look like? And part of this presentation was just to give the Finance and Administrative Committee an early look before we have our financial statements. Here, let me pull together some numbers that might be representative of how we're doing so that you can have an early look as possible, but it's also good to step back and say, well, how does everything look? And so I tried.
These are all funds through which the general fund is funded. So we see the general fund up there. I don't want to say that general fund funding is arbitrary, but John pretty much decides how much of this goes to fund the general fund, given the anticipated expenses. But this is a more complete picture of everything that comes into the town.
And so if you look at our annual report, I reference a page number, and that's a piece of it. And you look at our monthly reports, and we have a schedule like this, but I don't necessarily talk about it in the report, and I'll try to start including this a little bit just so you can have a full picture. And I hadn't ever tried to do the full picture, just kind of a report more like a newspaper instead of a magazine or an annual report. What is it like today? And give you kind of that kind of information. But it's good to step back and let's look at some annual numbers also. So you put our governmental fund revenues together, and over 2016 to 2021, and I called it a roller coaster, and that's just how I would characterize that. But you also, I can look at these numbers and say, well, 2019 and 2020 were less than the previous year. That seems counter to what some of these other numbers are showing. And I wanted to know, well, let's talk a little more about this. Let's look into the details a little bit more. So I pulled out hurricane reimbursements, which are a big piece of it, narrowed in on just a little in 3 years instead of 5 year. And all of a sudden we had this blue number as a revenue trend. And then the purple number is total revenues. And you can see that from 2019 to 2020, we dropped by $4 million in total, all governmental funds. We dropped. And so that's our COVID number. Really clearly, 2020 was going on a good note. And then when COVID hit, it dropped significantly. And so our total dropped by $4 million. And so we had started 2020 on a really good note. But finished, because of COVID, less than what we would have liked. But then if you compare 2021, strong. And those strong numbers continue into 2022. And so you put just the same trend line in, you can see where if that same trend would have continued into 2021 versus what actually happened in 2021, really, really strong, and we can certainly be thankful. And here's some of the pieces and parts of this, and you can see the different colors. Really, really strong year, real estate transfer fee, really, really strong year on beach and hospitality taxes, and I'll put some more in future years. But yeah, 2021 was a good year. 2022, we're on to a good start. And yeah, the other thing too, let's see if I can back up. I put that on here, 127 in the annual report. So take a look at that, and you can kind of see the detailed breakdown. And I think that was helpful, and that's one of the ways that I look at it when I compare, is that I like to take the annual numbers, and this is what was in the books, and these are our official full year, so that we can compare apples to apples as much as possible. Key issues going forward, I try to include a couple of those, and we're working on starting budget requests, working with the different departments. We're working with our forecasting our revenues for next year. And so this is the time that we would ask you to start thinking about your recommendations and what your input to us, so that we can craft the budget that is going to be representative of town council's viewpoint. We're crafting the budget that would match up with your priorities. And so now is the time to kind of think through that. We will all sit down and kind of talk a little bit about what your priorities are, and we're not far away from those conversations. Again, when should council consider acting? And so we'll keep doing these, and hopefully our numbers will keep strong. And then when we talk about an annual review of needs, annual review of policy, I think that's the appropriate time, and we'll have a good consideration. Okay, as we present the budget, let's make sure the policy lines up with what council wants. And so we'll have that, or those collective, because there's a number of different policies that I think are you don't want to just put them on a shelf and say, well, that's what they've always been. We need to take a look at it and make sure this is what we really want. Comments or questions, Mr. Chair?
John, your monthly review is going to make this year's budget prep work a lot more meaningful and a lot easier for all of us. So we don't get hit with everything at budget time. We've had this lead up, and I think it's been very effective. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you. I think I've asked this question before, and that is, do you have relationships with other communities that are somewhat similar to Hilton Head Island? I realize there's no one else that's the same, but somewhat similar, and are they seeing the same sort of trends in hospitality and real estate fees and so forth? Have you had those discussions with any of them?
We have, and we've had a number of coastal communities are doing well. We're doing better than most. And so we're exceptional, I think.
We have a better finance department here.
Because other communities don't have.
Yeah, we're just the one community that does have the real estate transfer fee, and that helps that we have a hospitality tax and a beach fee, and so and a accommodations tax, and so I think because of that dynamic, it gives us it's better when times are bad, and it's better when times are good.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one comment, John, as we move into the budgetary discussions. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of pressure about stormwater, and I still don't really have my head wrapped around the stormwater fee and that sort of thing. So as you bring that forth, just really diving into that. I know that there's the more and more that we see new development on Hilton Head, that puts even more pressure on our stormwater, and how we are going to deal with that on a long-term basis. I think is an important part of the discussion.
Yeah, and I would note that, thank you for the question. When we talk about governmental funds, stormwater is not a governmental fund. We consider that like a utility, and so the stormwater fees pay for the stormwater activities. And so even with this analysis, there's more to it. And so I'll make sure to include some stormwater information next time. And yeah, that's something that we look at. One of the changes that Mark recommended and we were able to do is that the stormwater capital projects are now part of the overall capital program, and hopefully that will raise the awareness and make it more transparent as we consider all of these. And so we'll continue with that, but then we'll also dive into stormwater operations and the stormwater budget. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other business to come before the committee? I have two comments. One, Josh and Sean and staff, outstanding job in crafting the procedure for the ARPA funds through the foundation. Absolutely outstanding. I think it's going to work. I'll be anxious to see what happens after 2023. And lastly, we haven't talked about it, but this committee has responsibility for the monitoring of 25 townwide strategies coming out of the strategic plan. And we have 9 months before a new council is seated. And one of the strategies is pretty high in the priority list, and that is the extension of the real estate transfer fee. So, Josh, I'd like to engage this committee in those 25 strategies, and probably 5 or 6 of the strategies are well in process already. But I'd like to engage this committee in a review of those 25 strategies prior to the new council being seated. Some discussions will be a matter of minutes. Other discussions will probably be longer. So would you recommend the order in which and the timing of which we have the discussion at F&A committee of the 25 strategies such that we're concluded, at least in the update of those 25, by the time the new council is seated?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. What we can do for the next regularly scheduled meeting, we'll plan on bringing forward an item regarding the real estate transfer fees. As the town manager indicated earlier today, we have a meeting coming up, I believe, next week with the Realtors Association to have some of those discussions and kind of continue to progress that issue forward. So we'll be able to give an update on how those conversations have gone, maybe some of the feedback that we've gotten to this point. In terms of a comprehensive overview of all of these strategies, I know when we kind of laid this out, the thought was that we would do some kind of mid-year touch base to review all of them, not only for this committee, but for all of the strategies that we have going on at this point. So that's something where I can work with the town manager, kind of identifying what does that look like, and then figure out with you what information do we need to bring back to the committee itself, just maybe to kind of focus a little bit more emphasis on a number of those items.
Okay. All right. Bill?
I'd just like to make a very positive comment. The redistricting effort townwide has fallen into the bucket that we address here. And from my perspective, the technical support that Josh and Matthew and what's the other gentleman's name? Jay, have given has been nothing but outstanding. And the more we see it, we always want to dive deeper, and they're very welcoming when we do that, and they're technically capable of responding. So, thank you.
Good. Any other comments? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Sean?